Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing my May wrap-up. May ended up being a really great reading month for me. I was able to read 19 different books. I did have a lot of DNFs. I feel like I've also been going through a lot of really big life changes in the month of May, and one of those big changes was hitting 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. I can't thank you enough for this. Like, really, this was such a dream come true. And I am planning to do a 100K Q&A type of video at some point in the month of June. But before we do jump into the wrap-up, I just wanted to take a second to thank today's video sponsor, which is Book of the Month. Because if you're an avid reader who somehow has never heard of Book of the Month, then let me tell you about this monthly book subscription service that I've been using for over a decade now. Book of the Month has a vision to inspire and shape a more curious and thoughtful culture. Their mission is to bring the best new fiction forward, which they definitely do. So basically how this works is every month they have between 5, even up to 7 monthly selections for you to choose from. All of the books are usually new releases, and sometimes they even have early releases where you can't get the book anywhere else. I love finding out what the monthly selections are gonna be. It's actually my favorite day of the month, and I love that there's always a mix of either some of my most anticipated books of the year as selections, but just as often there's books that I've never heard of, and I'm always discovering new favorites because of Book of the Month. I love that they're always offering picks in so many different genres. Plus, they offer the best prices on new release hardcover fiction books, as well as free shipping and a loyalty program. And for a limited time, you can join Book of the Month using the code SOLSTICE to get your first book for just $9.99. I mean, the fact that this is still the deal that they're offering is absolutely mind-boggling to me. Like, that is such a good deal. For the month of June, I ended up grabbing 2 books from Book of the Month. The first one that I got was this one called Main Characters. This is one that I've actually never heard of before Book of the Month, but it sounds like it's gonna be a book that's like perfect for me because she wants to be a director and he's an actor and he doesn't know what he wants out of his life. I love books that follow characters with these types of jobs. And then I also ended up picking up this book called Phoebe Berman's Gonna Lose It. This is another one that got put on my radar pretty recently. It sounds like it's gonna be so cute and it's already getting some really high praise. Definitely be sure to click that link down below and check out Book of the Month. And thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video. And now let's get into the wrap up. So as I mentioned, I did have a number of books that I ended up DNFing this month, which I'm so bummed about some of these because I thought some of these were gonna be like new favorites of mine. One of the books that I DNF'd that I already talked about in a reading vlog is Our Perfect Storm by Carly Fortune. I've realized about myself that I really don't like childhood friends to lovers as a trope in romance, unless it's gay. I also ended up DNFing Make Me Better by Sarah Gailey. I only got about like 50 pages into this one and I was just really not vibing with the writing style. One of the romance books that I DNF'd this month is The Bridge Back to You. I only got like 40 pages into this one. I don't know, I'm undecided if this is like a permanent DNF. I might come back to this at some point in the future, but I just wasn't really feeling it. And then another one that I feel that same way about is this one, Annie Knows Everything. I got 50 pages into this one, and this is another one where like I don't really know if I'm vibing with the writing style in this. And this is the one that I'm most devastated about, but I ended up DNFing the new Lisa Jewell, It Could Have Been Her. This one is actually going to be publishing in the month of June, and I got 85 pages into this one and I just don't care. You know, Lisa Jewell is one of my favorite thriller authors, so I'm really upset that I don't seem to be vibing with this book. I don't know, I find all of the characters to be pretty obnoxious, and I feel like this book has only been frustrating for me to read so far because it's just introducing so many characters in different timelines and I'm already getting confused. I might have to try this one again maybe when the audiobook comes out and see if that can like help me push through some of the slow beginning. But you have no idea how upset I am that I DNF'd the new Lisa Jewell. I also wanted to mention that in the month of May, I ended up making an exclusive video for my Patreon that was a monthly vlog, and that video ended up being like an hour and 18 minutes long because I had so many crazy life changes happening in the month of May. I will be talking about a lot of these big life changes here soon on YouTube. Probably when I do my 100K Q&A video, I'll be talking a lot about what's been going on with me. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the books. I'm gonna be starting with the books that I rated the lowest and then working my way up to the books that I've rated the highest. So the lowest rated book that I had this month was actually How to Survive Camping, The Man with No Shadow. This one is a cozy horror that I probably should have known wouldn't be my thing because I keep trying to get into books that are described as cozy and most of the time I just end up feeling really bored by them. So this is definitely a me thing. It's not really the book, but it's just one that I really wanted to try because I saw it one day in the Barnes & Noble and I was like, this is so freaking cute. And it also got recommended to me. Like I actually ended up reading this book for that video that I just did that was like reading books that you think that I'm gonna give 5 stars. And unfortunately, I only ended up giving this one around 2 stars. I think in theory, this book is such a cool concept because in this story, you're following this character who owns this campground called Goat Valley. The campground has been in her family for generations and they've always known that the campground is haunted. And she has this like full list of rules for the campers of like all the things that you're not supposed to do. And it's rules to help you survive the camping experience. And then each one of the chapters kind of describes like a different situation with like a different monster. Some of it was like really fun and really creepy, but a lot of it just kind of felt like cheesy to me because because like there would be scenes where she's actually like talking and like having dialogue with the monsters and they're like negotiating. Also just read kind of clunky to me because each one of the chapters, I guess it was like originally a bunch of different short stories on Reddit, and then they ended up putting them all together for this book, and I feel like you can kind of tell. I also just didn't really love the protagonist in this book. Like I found her to be so frustrating. I feel like she was one of those characters that was kind of grumpy, and she just didn't really have any sympathy for any of these campers who were like dying on her campground. She was like, well, they should have followed the rules. Next up, a book that I gave 2.5 stars was In Stormy Weather. Ugh, you have no idea how bummed I am because look at how well it was going in the beginning. Okay, I had so many annotations at the start of this, and I really thought this was gonna be like a new 5-star favorite romance of mine, because what I loved about this book is that we're following these two characters named Sebastian and Quincy, and both of them have content creator jobs. Both of them have really big social media followings, and they do content creation for like their full-time job, and their social media is all related to weather. Both of them are meteorologists, and so I loved hearing about their jobs specifically. Like I really loved their passion for weather. That was definitely like my favorite thing about this book, because in this book both of their characters are kind of going through this period where they feel like they're kind of getting burnt out on content creation. They don't think it's as fulfilling as it once was, and they're kind of both looking to add more purpose to their lives. And I felt so incredibly seen by some of the things that these characters were talking about at the beginning, and it was also getting kind of weird because we had so much in common. It's like she's 31, I'm 31, she just hit a milestone on social media, which I did as well. And so I immediately felt so connected to them. But then the romance in this book just really didn't work for me. I don't know, Sebastian as a character, I found him to be so annoying and kind of cocky, and like he just never really grew on me. I thought he was a little bit more obnoxious as opposed to like charming, which I think is what the author was trying to go for. And the nickname thing, oh my god, don't even get me started, because you know that I can't stand cheesy nicknames in romance, and he literally calls her Quinny Baby like so many times, like multiple times per page. And then she starts to call him Sebby. Ugh. Like I would have been fine with Quinn, or even like Quinny is like pushing it, but it's fine. But like Quinny Baby, no, jail. And honestly, by the time we got to the second half of this book, I feel like all of their banter just like completely fizzled out, and it just started to fall into that same like, sex scene after sex scene after sex scene, and I just did not care. I didn't really like the way that the sex scenes were written in this book. Like they did absolutely nothing for me. So I'm so upset that this is a 2.5 star. This one's actually going to be publishing in July. Another book that I gave 2.5 stars that like I actually want to cry over this. Like I'm so upset that I didn't like this book, and that's I Know a Place by Nat Cassidy. If you know me and my reading taste, then you probably know that Nat Cassidy is one of my top favorite horror authors. His book Nestlings and his book When the Wolf Comes Home are two of my favorite books that I've ever read. And like maybe I should have gone into this with lower expectations, because this one is actually a collection of short stories, which includes the book Rest Stop, which is a novella that I read a while ago, and I think I gave Rest Stop 2 stars when I read it. And so Rest Stop is the first chunk of this book, and then after that we get a bunch of different short stories in here. And if you were wondering, I only gave one of the short stories in this collection 5 stars, and that was the short story that was called Come. I really liked that one. And then I also really loved the short story that was called Laugh Lines, and the last one that was called A Fruiting Body, especially that last one on audio. Oh my god, it was so good. It was like they really layered that audiobook with like all the voices of the narrators and all these sound effects. It was so creepy. But like otherwise, all the rest of the stories in this book, in my opinion, they were very forgettable. They kind of felt like half-baked ideas. Like I just wanted so much more out of these stories. So I feel so let down by this. Like you have no idea. I went to Barnes & Noble the day this book came out and I bought it full price because I was so excited. Alright, and then jumping into my 3-star reads, I'm telling you, this was a pretty good reading month because I only had 3 books that I rated under 3 stars. Like, that's pretty good. One of the first books that I ended up giving 3 stars is this one called This Book Made Me Think of You by Libby Page. I did end up reading this one in that reading vlog that I made where I was reading books that you think that I would give 5 stars. And I feel bad because I absolutely understand why this is one that you think that I would give 5 stars, because this is one of those like beautiful, like heartwarming, kind of like gut-wrenching stories about this woman. Her husband has recently passed away, and then she gets a phone call from her local bookstore saying that her order is ready to pick up. She's like, what are you talking about? And when she goes to the bookstore, she finds out that her husband, before he passed away, he set up this whole thing where she was going to be getting a book from her husband every month for the next year. And so this is a story about her going to the bookstore every month and like seeing which book her husband picked out for her. It's a really beautiful and touching premise. And I do think that this is a book that I probably would have loved if I had read it a few years ago. I just feel like my reading taste has changed a little bit over time, and I'm not really reaching for books like this anymore that are like really sappy happy, really like heartfelt stories that are like intended to make you cry. And not only that, but I just feel like I never really felt that connected to the characters, and I can't really explain why. It just never really pulled on my emotional like heartstrings in the way that I expected it to. And I actually would recommend, if you read this book and you're looking for something similar that could actually make you cry, I would recommend The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, because that is one of my favorite books of all time, and I did see a lot of similarities with this book and that book. Another book that I only gave 3 stars to is Honey, which this one is a bummer, and I have such mixed feelings about this book because this one is a horror book that's about this woman who's a professor, and one day she accidentally kills this man, and then she discovers that she like really enjoyed it and she decides to start killing more men. But I think this book didn't really work for me for a number of reasons, and the main one was the writing in this book. I just found the writing to be very slow paced. This one definitely reads a lot more like literary horror instead of just horror, and I feel like it just had this really like passive writing style where like a lot of the horror was taking place off page. I'm just so torn over how I want to rate this though, because I absolutely loved the ending of this book. Like the last chapter was so interesting and so good, and definitely one of the highlights of the whole book for me. But at the same time, I just don't really think this is going to be one that I'll recommend very widely. There's also a lot of social commentary in this book, which I think is a really great thing, but it also does feel a little bit heavy-handed at times. And then I also ended up reading this horror sci-fi novella called Abyss by Nicholas Binge, and this is another one that I ended up giving 3 stars for kind of similar reasons actually, because this one also had a lot of commentary that felt a little bit heavy-handed, because in this story we're following this guy named Joe, and he ends up getting this new job for this company, and when he's there at the building he just kind of feels like something is off, like things are weird, and it's kind of like deserted, like he's not really seeing a lot of other people there. This book actually does compare itself to Severance, the TV show, which I would absolutely say is 100% accurate. Like this reminded me so much of Severance. I was actually so invested in this book in the beginning, but then as we got closer to the second half and you start to realize like what's actually happening, I just quickly started to lose interest. And like I was saying, a lot of the commentary just felt so heavy-handed that I was like, oh my gosh, like I get it. Another book that I read this month was this collection of short stories called My Dear You by Rachel Khong. And I've actually never read anything by this author before, but I just saw this at my library recently and I was like, what is that? Like I really was drawn to this cover. And when I found out that this was a collection of short stories, I got really excited because like that's one of my favorite things to read. Some of these stories read more like literary fiction, and then some of them kind of read like sci-fi. I definitely preferred the short stories in this collection that read a little bit more sci-fi. Like it says there's this one where the US government injects all citizens with a drug that makes them see everyone else as a member of their own race and gender. That was a crazy one. There's also a story where a woman adopts a cat who conjures the ghosts of her ex-loves. And then there's also one about a factory worker who befriends a sex doll she is tasked with selling. That one actually ended up being my favorite in the entire collection. I'm pretty sure that was the one called Serene, and I think that one was like my top favorite. But overall, I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. It was mostly a really good time, and I enjoyed a lot of the short stories in this collection. And then I also ended up reading The Caretaker by Marcus Kluwer. This was actually my book troop book club pick for the springtime. We just had the live show pretty recently, so I'll have that link down below if you missed it. I'm still kind of undecided on my rating for this book because I loved so much of it, but I did have some issues with it, and I think it's probably going to be around like a 3.75 if I'm being like very technical. But gosh, this book was such a wild ride. This is from the same author as We Used to Live Here, which is like one of my top favorite horror books that I've ever read. And I think it's incredible that the synopsis for this book basically gives away nothing. Like you don't know anything about what the story ends up actually being about, which I think is so impressive. But what you do know about this story is that you're following this woman named Macy, and one day she sees this ad on Craigslist for this job for being a caretaker for this elderly man. And Macy's in a place where she desperately needs money. She's the guardian for her younger sister that she's been taking care of. And when she gets to the house for the interview, things seem a little bit off, and she finds out that the job is not exactly what she was thinking it was going to be, but she's in no position to say no to this amount of money. This book was just so creepy and so entertaining. Something that I absolutely loved about this story was actually Macy's character and her relationship that she had with her younger sister. Like they were so cute and they were so funny. Like there were so many lines that her younger sister would say that would actually like make me laugh out loud. Like she was hilarious. And I really loved the mystery kind of behind this book and like trying to figure out like what exactly was going on. I think the only reason why I didn't end up giving this one a higher rating is because some of the plot ended up getting a little bit repetitive, and I still kind of have like mixed thoughts on the ending of this one. I don't know, but this was definitely such a memorable horror book for me. I just love the way that this author writes horror. Oh my gosh, like I will read anything he writes. All right, and then jumping into the book books that I gave 4 stars. The first one I wanted to talk about is Upward Bound. This is one that I ended up reading for the Battle of the Book Clubs vlog that I made, so I'll have that link down below if you missed it. But this is the one that I ended up reading for Read with Jenna's book club. This one actually takes place at this adult daycare center in Los Angeles that's called Upward Bound. And what's really cool about this book is that we get a number of different perspectives from so many different characters in this book, because we get to hear from so many different kinds of people in this book. Like, not only people who are, you know, staying at this daycare, and like some of these characters who are like nonverbal or autistic that are staying there, but then we also do get the perspective of some of the staff, like people who are working there. And this book is a rather short one, by the way. It's only 180 pages. I ended up giving this one 4 stars overall because I really enjoyed getting certain perspectives in this book. There were some perspectives in this book that I didn't end up enjoying as much, which is why I only gave this one 4 stars instead of 5 stars. Like, there was this perspective from this one girl that was like the lifeguard that was like working there for the summer, and I just didn't really care for her chapter. I was like skimming through most of it. But my favorite chapters in this book were actually reading from the characters who were nonverbal and who were struggling to like communicate all of these feelings that they had to the staff that was working there. It was just very eye-opening and really sad in a lot of ways too. This was a really thought-provoking read that had some really great character moments. Another book that I ended up giving 4 stars is 10 minutes 38 seconds in this strange world, and I'm so glad that I read this, even though like, wow, this book was really heavy. In this story, you're following this woman named Leela, and she's living in Turkey, and right at the start of this book she gets murdered and her body gets left behind, and you're kind of following from her character's perspective in the 10 minutes and 38 seconds after she's died. And this book was written in the most beautiful way, because not only are you following this character, you know, like in the 10 minutes after her death, but she's doing a lot of reflecting on her life and her childhood and like all the things that she's gone through. I will say you might want to look up some trigger warnings for this one, especially for things that she experienced in her childhood when it comes to like an adult taking advantage of her, because oh my gosh, like there was some really tough things to read in this book, but the writing in this book was so good. Like, I just instantly felt drawn into the story. The only reason why I didn't end up giving this one 5 stars is because in the second half of the book, the perspective kind of changes, because you're no longer following from her perspective, but you kind of get the perspective of like her 5 closest friends. I mean, don't get me wrong, I really did enjoy the second half of this story, and I loved the kind of like found family thing that was happening with like her and her friends, and the ending of this book was very strong and it ended on such a good note. But there were some parts in the second half of the book that started to lose me just a little bit in terms of like the storytelling, but this was such a powerful read and one that I would highly recommend. I also ended up giving 4 stars to Into the Blue by Emma Brody. I'm so sad that this one was only a 4 star, because for most of the book, like while I was reading it, I was so sure that this was going to be like a 5-star new favorite of mine. I was absolutely loving it at the beginning. Oh my god, like this felt like one of those books that's like written just for me, because the story starts where we're following this character named AJ, and at the start of this, she's only like 17 years old, and she has this dream of eventually becoming a writer for SNL one day. I love books that follow writers like this, and at the time when she's 17 years old, she's absolutely obsessed with this TV show called The Astronomicals, and she writes fan fiction for this TV show that she's really into. And then the story's actually about her and this guy named Noah, and it's actually like his aunt, or maybe it's his grandma, who was an actress on the show The Astronomicals that AJ is obsessed with. And so the beginning of this book is about AJ and Noah as they're working together in this like video rental store in the early 2000s when they're teenagers, and kind of like building this connection with each other. And this story is the type of story that takes place over like decades of time. It's one of the most beautiful and like heartbreaking love stories. Oh my gosh, it's like right person, wrong time. It's just one of those stories where they're constantly like pining after each other, but it's never the right time. Oh my god, it was so beautifully written. And like the romance in this book was so good. Like some of the steamy scenes were actually like so spicy, and I was like, oh, like the way that the smutty scenes were written in this book really surprised me. Like they were so good. The only reason why I didn't give this one 5 stars is because this book is a little bit long, and at times it was starting to feel repetitive in the second half. And I also at times I found AJ to be like a little bit annoying, because she has like a lot of insecurities that keep getting brought up like over and over again. But otherwise, this was kind of like a perfect book for me, and I just absolutely adore these characters. Another book that I gave 4 stars to is Monsters in the Archives, My Year of Fear with Stephen King. This one is actually a non-fiction book that is kind of like a deep dive about some of Stephen King's novels. This author, Caroline Bix, she kind of got the opportunity to like go to Stephen King's house, and she got to look over a lot of his like original manuscripts for some of his most iconic stories. It's really cool because this book does a deep dive on Pet Sematary, The Shining, Night Shift, Salem's Lot, and Carrie, which are all books that I've read by Stephen King. And this book does include spoilers for all of those books, so just a heads up about that. But I really loved this, you know, as somebody who really loves hearing about like the writing process. I mean, I have read On Writing by Stephen King, which is his other nonfiction book, where he kind of talks a lot about his writing process and like what that looks like. But this one was also really cool to read because it was kind of told from an outsider's perspective. It was really cool to hear some of the crazy stories about his manuscripts over the years, and like what little differences he made before the books got published, and like how how some of these stories came to be in the first place. I think if you're a fan of Stephen King, you definitely need to check out this one because it was so fascinating. All right, now we're getting into some of my top favorites that I've read this month because These Violent Delights is one that I read and I gave this book 4.5 stars. Really enjoyed this one and I'm so glad because I actually read this book for the video where I read books that you thought that I would give 5 stars. And this is one that I had never really heard of before, or like it wasn't really on my radar. And this is so my kind of book, like absolutely my kind of book. This is one that's kind of hard to describe genre-wise because it does kind of read like dark academia, literary fiction, but also a bit of like dark romance in it too. Because in this story, we're following these two boys named Paul and Julian, and it's taking place in the 1970s. And it says, in this Hitchcockian tale of two college students, both with troubled pasts, whose escalating obsession with each other will radically alter the course of their lives. The story is basically about these two boys named Paul and Julian who are slowly becoming obsessed with each other in a way that's like romantic, but also kind of toxic at the same time. So because their obsession with each other ends up leading to an act of violence, it kind of does read a little bit like a thriller, like just a little bit, but it's definitely more of like a literary vibe, and this one feels like more of a character study with these two characters, Paul and Julian. But like, oh my god, the writing in this book was absolutely incredible. Like, I loved the way that their obsession with each other was written. It was just so messy. If you're the type of person that likes to read about like messy, complicated queer relationships, then like, oh my god, this is the book for you. If you like dark academia vibes, this is the book for you. I also couldn't help but like compare this book to Don't Let the Forest In, which is like one of my favorite books that I've ever read in my life. I think it reminds me of that book not only because it's the same audiobook narrator, by the way, but like in some ways these characters do remind me of the boys from Don't Let the Forest In, but this book is obviously like a lot darker in tone. But if you enjoyed Don't Let the Forest In, then like you need to read this one immediately. I also gave 4.5 stars to this book called Boring Asian Female. This was one of the best books that I read this month because it was so interesting. It was so well written. This is definitely going to get put on my shelf of like weird girl books that I just absolutely adore. I would highly recommend this one if you were also a big fan of like Big Swiss or A Good Person. Like those are definitely the first two books that come to mind, but I'm sure there's like so many others just like this, where like you kind of have a main character who is a little bit like unlikable, a little bit narcissistic, makes some questionable choices, but the book is so entertaining that you cannot put it down. In this story, we're following this young Asian girl who is currently going to college in New York, and she's originally from South Dakota, and this is about how she's trying to get into law school. She's applying to all of her top universities for law school and she keeps getting rejected. And then this other girl, Laura, who's half Asian and half white, she ends up getting accepted into her dream school. And this is kind of a story about how like she starts to become weirdly obsessed with this girl, Laura. And that's only like the tip of the iceberg in terms of like plot for this book, because this book was so unhinged. I loved reading from the perspective of this character because I never knew what she was gonna do next. Like she was just so wildly unpredictable in a way that made the story so much fun. And not only that, but I do feel like this book has so much great commentary, not only about race, but about like how difficult it can be to be a student trying to get into these schools that are so competitive, and the way that the schools really put a lot of pressure on these kids to like stand out and be different, and like how soul crushing it can feel to a student that like works their entire lives towards getting into this school just to be rejected. So this book just had so much about it that I really loved, and I thought the writing was so good. I also ended up giving 4.5 stars to the thriller book that's called 5. This was such a lovely surprise because going into this book, when I heard the setup for this, where you're like, okay, we have 5 strangers who are on this train in London, and you know that one of them is gonna die, but you don't know who. The premise makes you think that it's gonna be this like really fast-paced, like intense thriller, but that's not really what this is. This one's actually like much more of like a slow burn, almost like a literary thriller, but I loved the writing in this book so much. And I actually highly recommend the audiobook too, because the audiobook was so cool. It had a lot of like sound effects, like you're at the train station with them. In some of the chapters, you would get these second-person narration style, where it's like, now direct your attention over to the left and you'll see these characters entering the scene. It almost read like very cinematic in that way. And it's like you have this feeling of dread because you know that one of them is gonna die, and it's written in this way where it's like you're anticipating one of these characters is gonna die, and it's teasing you about like which one is it gonna be. And then in alternate chapters, in between those chapters, we get a chapter about each one of these 5 characters, and you kind of get to hear about like almost their entire life story and like what brought them to this train and like how they ended up here. And it's so fascinating. Like this book really makes you think a lot about like first impressions and the way that we like really judge people before we know anything about them. My favorite chapter in this book was actually the chapter that was about this elderly woman named Mrs. Worth. And like when you're first seeing her interact with all of these other people, like you're thinking to yourself like, oh my god, like this woman is awful. Like she's literally the worst, like the way that she thinks about other people. And reading her chapter about like what happened in her childhood with like the way that she was raised, it was just so crazy crazy. And I thought that chapter was written so well and it was so well done. Like I could not pull my eyes away from the page. Another book that I gave 4.5 stars to is Stranger Things Have Happened by Casey West. Oh my gosh, I love the way that Casey West has been writing these adult romance books recently, because she's also the author of We Met Like This, which is one that I read last year that I really loved. And then she used to be a writer of a lot of young adult contemporary romance books that I really loved back in the day. But this one is so great because we're following this protagonist named Sutton, and she owns a restaurant. And then the love interest is this guy named Elijah, and he owns this boxing gym with his brother. At the start of this book, she's hanging out with her best friend, and her best friend is dating this guy Elijah's brother. And the brother is kind of talking about how like he doesn't think therapy is even real or really helpful. And so she decides to help her friend by trying to prove a point, because they're saying that they think a therapist would be able to tell if a couple's not even real. So her and this guy Elijah, they agreed to do this like couples therapy, even though they're not even a real couple, because she's hoping that the therapist will be able to tell that they're not a real couple. I mean, yes, the premise is kind of silly and stupid, but like, oh my god, they were so cute. The way that the tension was written between them in some of these scenes, I was like squealing over them. But I love that this book and these characters had so many layers, because even though it appears like a fun rom-com on the surface, I feel like this book also deals with a lot of like heavy subject matter things as well. I mean, the fact that Sutton is taking care of her very sick mother, and that's kind of like what brings her back to this town in the first place. But it's really hard to read because her mom doesn't really want her there, even though she knows that she needs her around. So her mom is like taking her for granted and kind of being like pretty vile towards her, even though she's her only caretaker and she desperately needs her help. And so there are some darker themes being explored in this book, but I just thought it was all handled so well, and I really loved Sutton and Elijah as characters. Like I just instantly felt connected to them. The only reason why I didn't give this one 5 stars is because the third act conflict in this book, or like something that happened towards the end, I just really didn't care for. Alright, and now moving on to the 3 books that I gave 5 stars this month, some of my new top favorites. One of those is going to be The Sorrow Stones by Felix Blackwell. This is an author that I have loved in the past. It's the same author as Stolen Tongues, and this one was so creepy. Oh my god, like this one has a lot of things that I personally love in horror. So something that I love about this book is that you're following this young boy, and the story's taking place in like the late 90s, early 2000s, when he's going trick-or-treating with his friends. And while he's trick-or-treating, he ends up getting this like weird, creepy statue. And this story ends up spanning through a few years of this young boy's life. And it seems like every Halloween he keeps collecting a lot of these statues. Feels like these statues are kind of cursed. There's bad luck that happens in his life, but then there's also good luck that like balances it out. I love stories like this that kind of deal with like good luck and bad luck when it comes to horror. I just find that to be so fascinating. It really reminded me of that episode of Supernatural that I love called Bad Day at Black Rock. Like if you liked that episode, I think you would love this book because it's all about that. Oh my gosh, this book was absolutely horrifying. The amount of trigger warnings that have to exist for this book, because wow, like there's some really dark stuff that happens in this. I talked a little bit more about that in the reading vlog where I read it, so I'll have that link down below if you want to know more details about that. But like wow, this book was so dark and it was so heavy at times, but like I could not pull my eyes away from the page. I read this all within one afternoon because I could not put the book down, and it was just so good and so creepy. Like this just had everything that I personally love in horror. And then another book that I gave 5 stars to this month is this romance book called Female Fantasy. Oh my god, dude, the way that I loved this. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did. In this story, we're following this character named Junie, and she is a really big fangirl when it comes to this book series that she loves that follows this character who's like a merman, and his name is Reich. And at the start of this book, she sees this live show that this author is like talking about the book series, and she actually says that the character Reich is inspired by this real life man Ryan that she went to college with. And so in this story, it's about how Junie decides that she's gonna take a road trip to New York to try and go and meet this man in real life. Like she's absolutely delulu, like in the best way. Then the romance in this book is actually between her and her brother's best friend, who ends up joining her on this road trip because he also has something to do in New York. And it's kind of about them like on the road together, and he's like making fun of her for being like so obsessed with her fan fictions and so obsessed with her story. Like Junie is one of the most relatable characters I've read in a long time. Like if you're somebody who's also like a huge fangirl, like I am, like the type of like all-consuming, like it takes over every thought that you have kind of fangirl, then I think you're really gonna connect with this character. She was just so funny, and I love the way that she so passionately defended romance with her life. And I also just loved this guy Nico as a love interest, like her brother's best friend. He was like one of my perfect ideal love interests because he's one of those guys that's like so grumpy, but then he's like very soft for her. And I love that they have such a shared history and that he knows her very well. I will say though that the plot of this book gets absolutely ridiculous, like over the top crazy, but I personally really loved that about this. I thought it made the book so much fun, but this had to be a 5 star because of the romance. Like oh my god, it was so good. good. Like this book had one of my favorite sex scenes that I've ever read in my life. Like I was screaming over them. They were so adorable. Like it brought tears to my eyes. And then my top favorite book that I read this month has got to be Yesteryear. I did end up reading this one on my Kindle, but since finishing the book, I actually ordered a copy from the UK because I really like the cover for the UK like so much more than I like the American one. So I ordered my copy from Blackwell's and it's on the way to me now. But Yesteryear was so good. Like this is one of those new books that's getting a lot of hype right now, and I feel like it's absolutely deserving of the hype because in this story, you're following this woman named Natalie who is an influencer. She's kind of like a trad wife influencer. She lives on this farm and she has this perfect husband and she has like 6 children, and it's really entertaining because she kind of makes her life look very like effortless and like she can just do it all, you know, like she makes her sourdough bread, but then in reality she actually does have a lot of like nannies that are working for her and producers and like people that are filming her. And then this book is about how one day she wakes up and she believes that she's actually back in the 1800s and she has to live as if she's actually like a real traditional housewife. And this book was just so endlessly entertaining. Like Natalie as a character to follow, she's one of those characters that's like very unlikable, but she's so entertaining to read from her perspective. It kind of reminded me of like how I felt about Julie Chan is Dead. She's just ridiculous and she's so selfish, but there's something about her voice and like the narration style in this book that just really worked for me. I also love that this book has so much commentary, obviously not just about like social media and influencers and like how fake that whole world can be, but then also about like motherhood and like feminism and even like religion. There were so many topics handled in this book that I thought were handled so well. And not to mention the plot in this book, like are you kidding me? In the second half of this book, I was actually screaming over something that happened. I was like, no way. I also loved the final chapter of this book. Like, tell me why that almost made me like burst into tears. This is definitely one that I can see myself rereading again and again, which is why I had to buy the physical copy because it's just so good. I can't believe that this is a debut, by the way, from this author. Like the writing quality is insanely good for a debut. So I can't wait to see what this author does in the future. And I would highly, highly recommend Yesteryear. I think it's worth the hype and it's definitely one of my top favorite books that I've read this year. All right, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of May. I had a really great reading month for the most part. I mean, the fact that 7 out of the 19 books that I read were either 4.5 or 5 stars, like I think that's absolutely incredible. And you know what else I ended up finishing in the month of May was Supernatural. Ugh. Dude, I'm never getting over this show. I finished watching season 15 of Supernatural. I've been watching this show almost every single day since December last year, and Supernatural is 15 seasons long. You know, it's over 320 episodes, and I finished watching it at the end of May, and like I don't think I'm ever going to emotionally recover. Like Sam and Dean feel like family to me at this point, and I'm like, how soon is too soon to restart watching the show immediately? God, I'm so sad to be done with Supernatural. You have no idea. If you want to hear more of my thoughts about Supernatural, by the way, I've been posting a lot to my TikTok. I've been posting reviews for like every single season of Supernatural that I've watched, but then I also am planning to post other content related to Supernatural, like talking about my top favorite seasons or like my top 10 episodes of the whole show or like different things like that. So I will have my TikTok linked down below. But thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you've read any of these books, then please do let me know your thoughts on them and let me know how many books did you read in the month of May? What was your favorite book that you read in the month of May? Let me know down in the comments, and thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye!